Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm your host, Mike Malatesta. I'm an entrepreneur who's founded and led 2 8-figure companies. I'm also an investor, author, speaker, and lifetime learner. On this podcast, I explore stories of success in every episode and with every guest. What it means, why it's important, and of course, how it happens. You can subscribe, connect, and learn more about me at mikemalatesta.com. I'm fulfilling my promise to you today with another amazing success story. Dan T. Rogers joins me on the show. Dan is the CEO of Sales Sidekick and a proud former burrito roller. In September 2007, Dan woke up and realized he hated his job. The problem was that he was the boss. Listen and learn how Dan created his sidekick mentality, his 8 restraints, his 3 rules for Team Rogers, and why he believes that there are no special snowflakes. Here we go with Dan T. Rogers.
Hi, Dan. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. This has been sort of one of the, I want to thank you because it's one of the fastest turnarounds of meet somebody to having them on the podcast, I think, in the almost 200 of these that I've done. So you're a quick start, I think. But
that's correct.
To use
guilty as charged. Yeah.
To use a strategic coach term, I do want to say thank you to Justin Breen for connecting the two of us. I also noticed that Justin's company is called Brepic, and he's all about epic. And when I look at your website for Point to Point, the whole video is about epic and everything. So you guys are like a match made in heaven. Maybe.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Maybe.
For sure.
Maybe even a cartoon match made in heaven.
I'll take it if he will.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, well, I start every show by asking the guests the same simple question, Dan, and that is, how did it happen for you?
Yeah, so I think really where it happened for me is around September of 2007. I woke up and I hated my job. And that had not been the story, or that had not been my story, maybe ever, but certainly not for over 20 years. I mean, that was probably one of the first times, the only time it ever happened. And there was just one problem. I was my own boss. I owned a couple companies at the time, and I was completely the guy in charge, and I hated going to work, and I hated what we were doing, and I didn't like it, and I didn't enjoy it. And I sort of fancied myself a fairly accountable person. And I did what any sort of self-respecting, lack of self-accountable person would do, is I tried blaming first the employees, and then I blamed the customers, and then I blamed our providers. And then it was obvious. I mean, this is all pretty fast order, but like it was obvious that I was the blocker. And through the grace of the universe, I got introduced to a woman that would become our first coach. And in our initial meeting, we were having a cup of coffee, and she asked me a very simple question. She just said, "What's your vision?" And so this would be probably the longest that she'd ever let me speak, but it was our first meeting, so she gave me a little bit longer of a leash. She gave me about 45 seconds. And then she said, stop. And then I won't use the colorful language, but she said, "I don't know what you effing said, but whatever it is, it's not a vision. And if you don't have a vision, you can't articulate a vision. If you can't articulate a vision, you don't know what you want people to do. If you don't know what you want people to do, you can't ask people to do what you want. No wonder you hate working here. I'd hate working for you." And I said, "You're hired." I was like, you're hired. And I've come to find out that I think the way that I think of business coaches is they're psychotherapists with a license to kill, right? It's therapy, but somebody who's going to tell you the truth and sort of cut to the chase. And so where that conversation led to is that we did the work that you got to do, which is, we had an 8-digit conglomerate of a couple of companies. So we had success. We had been fast growing. We had done all this stuff, but we didn't have a vision. So we did the hard work of sort of clearing out what the vision was. And then I'm a fairly absolute guy. Once we got clear on the vision, then we had to live with the implications of the vision. And the implication of the vision was is 70 cents on the dollar didn't fit into the New World Order. And so we quietly, diplomatically moved on those customers. And we didn't know it, but the recession was coming right behind it. And so the recession came in right behind it and took another 70%. And you don't have to be a math guy, but I am. That's like a 91% drop in revenue in like 18 months. And so from there, with that clarity of vision, we started chasing that vision, kept sort of refining it. And that's what we came back to roughly 2.5 times the size we were before we took it apart. And so there was a 7 years in a row on the Inc. 5000 run into COVID. So that's really where it happened. There was obviously some magic that happened before that, but that was really, I'd say, where it happened is when I prided myself on sort of copying off the smartest kid in class for a very, very long time. But it wasn't until we got a coach and sort of had a smart kid on speed dial that we could run stuff by that it really started to happen.
Okay. Interestingly, you've used we and our a bunch there. Is it you and a partner, you and your wife? What's the we and the our here?
Yeah, so there's a couple, and I'll try not to get this too convoluted, but thank you for asking that. So initially it was we because we haven't run EOS the whole entire time, but we've run it most recently, and we ran Scaling Up / Rockefeller Habits before that. But my number two, I make the messes, she cleans them up. We have 17 years together, so it's definitely a we. It might be more her than me if there's anything, right? So that's a huge part of it. And then obviously to have the type of success that we've had is that there's just other people involved. And then on the business partner front, I did have a business partner from say 2004 till 2017-ish. Yeah, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole. Incredible guy, incredible mentor, all that. But yeah, that's a whole nother story. And he was a huge part of it as well. So
okay. Do you want to talk about that story or no?
Sure. It gets super convoluted fast, so I'll see if I can't break it down right. So when I was first looking to buy the company that I was selling for, I talked to all the people that I could think of that were smart business people. And prior to being in sales, I had worked and opened about 50 restaurants or so for a fast food chain. And I hit it just at the right time. I started with them. We had 3 stores, and in 2.5 years, we'd opened 50 plus and done all this crazy stuff. It was fantastic. It was like, I actually dropped out of college to roll burritos. Like, I mean, I did a little bit more than roll burritos, but I dropped out of college. And so that was sort of my undergrad and MBA all rolled up together. And prior to that, I had been moving furniture. And the company that I was moving furniture for was waiting for me to graduate college. And I was taking night classes. And then eventually I had to take day classes. And so I stopped moving furniture momentarily, started rolling burritos to finish up college. Burritos took off, never went back to college. The moving company called and said, hey, we were waiting for you to graduate. You're obviously not going to graduate, but now that you've done all this crazy stuff in business, do you want to come sell for us? We have, unlimited commissions. And so the allure of unlimited commissions and the fact that I didn't have any equity in the restaurant chain was enough for me to get into sales. Mm. So I went to work for a Mayflower Van Lines agency, and we had some brand recognition, not only as Mayflower, but also as a specialized provider inside that system. Had a really good run in sales in that, and then got to the place that I bought the agency from the guy that I worked for.
Okay.
So as the start of that conversation, I'm going to come back to the business partner, I promise. But at the start of that conversation, I talked to everybody I knew that was a business person. So I talked to the guys that I worked for in the restaurant business, and I talked to this guy that was my father-in-law at the time, and he's a very accomplished business person. He was primarily in natural resources, but he bought and sold or participated in buying and selling publicly traded companies. He was the finance guy. He was always, was usually the acquirer, right? They would buy companies. So he's a very, very sophisticated guy. And so I asked him some questions, and he was sort of one of like three mentors. Eventually, about 2 years into the business, we were talking so much about it, he actually bought in, not because we needed him to, but just because I was talking to him twice a week, right? And so the way that deal goes is I won't use the numbers, but he said, how about I buy in and I'll give you this much for 25%. I was like, sure. And at this point, I'm married to his daughter, and I'm going to inherit. He's got way more money than me, and I'm in the will, so who cares? And he took us to the cleaners on evaluation. Like he's a way better deal maker than me. So then he was involved, and we had that nice run up. We got to the 8-digit business, right? And then when we took the thing apart, right? First by by our own willing decisions, and then by the recession, we exceeded every goal that we set in terms of how much money we could lose by far. And he propped us up. We lived through his finances. He believed in what we were doing, but like we were obviously losing money. And so we borrowed money at interest from him, and then we capitalized some of that debt, and that made him a 50-50 owner. And then we went on the escalator ride up through that 7-year run. And he's got a wonderful daughter, but we were fairly incompatible. So I ended up divorcing his daughter and then eventually buying him out. So, so he's a great guy. There's a great relationship there. I haven't talked to him in a couple months, but in many ways, father figure that I never had. I will be learning from him for 30 years. I'm fortunate that he still takes my phone call, but I continue as I reflect on what he's told me to learn, not just about business, but just about life. I mean, he provided incredible demonstration. He's a great guy. But despite how great he is, we were 30 years apart, and there was a bit of a conflict in terms of having split ownership when one person is solely active in the business and the other one is just a fairly passive, incredibly smart and very, the wisdom per word that we got from him was off the charts, but he lived 2,000, 3,000 miles away. We talked a couple times a week. He was an incredibly valuable resource, but he wasn't active in the business, right? I mean, leaned on him super heavy, at the critical moments, and he provided great reality checks along the way and all that, but he was never active in the business. He's far too cool to be active in point to point. Yeah, far too cool, far too classy, but yeah. So,
okay.
So that's the we. There's always, so I'm big on the word sidekick because I think it's easier to get ahead, helping people to where they want to go. And I've been the product of the fast food restaurant thing. Was I got to ride on somebody else's coattails. They had the idea. I got them to help grow it. And with our clients, that's sort of how we position ourselves, is to help them. And I've gotten just unlimited help in all sorts of different forms and fashions from other people. So it just seems like we got to say we. I'm fairly comfortable with the part that I've brought. Like I've contributed, but the success is significantly larger than my contribution. So
okay. Well, I appreciate you going there, because I have to say I was not expecting that's where that story would go. So it was very interesting to follow you along with it, because it was.
I'm glad that all the dots connected. So yeah, and we'll leave their other names out, but those two folks, the her and the former business partner are, they're instrumental. I mean, one of the things that I've seen, I love the game of business. I'm fortunate that I know a bunch of other business owners, and one of the massive benefits that we had, and it's a little bit of just dumb blind luck, is that her name's Christine. I won't use your last name. Can't call her her. That's crazy. But Christine and I have been together this long, and she is such a great number two. And I've seen other people, whether it's an EO or strategic coach or whatever, that they don't have that number two. And it's rough sledding, man. It's rough sledding if you got to play both of those roles. And there's certainly times when you have to, because you're growing fast and all that, but huge part. And then in terms of the former business partner, he was never active, but like back a house financially, like we were set up from day one, like a publicly traded company, and our back office is bulletproof. And that's all stuff that's just incredibly expensive and time consuming to learn. And like we learned it from the beginning. So that's all stuff that is, fortunate to survive all my bad decisions and meet other business owners and stuff. It's like, oh, I had a lot. I mean, we knew it as we're going, but it becomes really obvious how much good fortune that we've had. Like, it's just like, we've done our part, but there's the universe has been pretty gentle on us overall. So.
Well, I'm glad you said that about the back office thing, because so often with entrepreneurs, the back office is the last thing that gets sort of professionalized, right? It's everything else kind of comes before back office because it's usually not the focus of the entrepreneur. And it's much better in my experience for every business to start with a good backstage, as Dan Sullivan might
absolutely, yeah,
and a good foundation there to support. You're going to support the business a lot better, as opposed to trying to get that up to speed when the business is already taking off, and it's just becomes very difficult. I don't tell this story to try to one up you, Dan. I just want to be clear about that.
Sure.
But I dropped out of college to work in the cemetery, which maybe that's.
Don't say that the next time I take a sip of coffee. That's not fair. Like,
maybe that's the same as rolling burritos. I don't know. Rolling burritos is like it's a step up from that decision that I made. So well done, I guess is what I would say. Fortunately, they told me I couldn't work there anymore after a semester, and I think that was the deacon's way of telling me to get my ass back in college, because I had no business working in a cemetery. At least that's what I've chosen to believe.
Sure.
And I noticed, you said you're big on Sidekick. You talk about your integrator in EOS terms. You're the visionary, I'm assuming, and Christine is the integrator.
Absolutely.
I see an illustration of Robin from Batman and Robin up on your wall. Sidekick, right? So I love that. I want to explore that a little bit more, because you have a business called Sales Sidekick now, which you're running. You started in just recently, I guess. So I want to get into that more. But before I do, I want to get back to this coach. How did you come about her? And I know that when you told the story, you said you reacted well to it, quick start decision. Hey, let's do this. But how did you find her? And when she was telling you all this stuff, were you in this first meeting where she abruptly cut you off after whatever it was and basically told you you're full of shit? What?
Oh, if we can swear, this is going to go great. I'm on my best behavior, but now it's open. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So I'm just like, it's good intellectually to be like, yeah, okay, I get it. But it's another thing to hear something like that, maybe even for the first time, when you're used to everybody sort of saying, "Great idea, Dan. We're behind you."
Yeah. No, like there's a couple words. Intentional sidekick is really, like, there isn't a business around that, but intentional sidekick is a concept that I've sort of held close to my heart for a decade. There's been a lot of intentionality around it, no pun intended. And so to get back to the question, I have 8 restraints, and they're really just sort of keep my brain in lockstep as best I can. And one thing that I noticed early on was that it was just more effective to copy off the smartest kid in class, and with honor. I'm not talking about cheating. That's a different story, right? And so here's how it rolls. If I go to class, I ace the tests. It's if I go. And my high school and college transcripts will reflect that if I go, I ace the test. And if I don't have a GPA. Like, but I don't show up for stuff unless I'm going to play. And so how I met the coach was, and I'll just get super, super real. Like, I'm a 5'7" and bald guy. And my MO is like, I'm in the middle of the pack and I work my way to the front. That's very comfortable for me to do. That's how things came to be in life. And I woke up one day, and I was the coolest guy in my life other than my father-in-law. Hands down, I was the most successful person. I mean, I paid more taxes than most people I knew made in a year. Like, I mean, I was the coolest guy I knew. I was married to this beautiful woman, like 2 golden retrievers, like everything's awesome. And I'm like, what the heck do I do? And I'm like, I need to upgrade my network so I can get some more, rear ends that I'm chasing. And so I EO appeared at that point in my life, and I joined EO. That was probably right around 2006-ish. And she was our chapter administrator at the time. It was just sort of part of our conversation on the intake of whether or not, I mean, I was qualified to be an EO by a long shot, but like it just came from there. And so like that intentionality piece, I can delude myself and run away from stuff with the best of them. But if I'm going to show, I show for real. Like and so I was that frustrated. So when I started rolling burritos in 1994, I told my mentor at the time, I'm like, they're going to pay me to practice the principles that you're trying to teach me. And he said to me, Dan, if you can keep that, you'll never work another day in your life. And so I've worked more than I want to admit to, but way less than I've been paid for, like way less, way less. So to wake up 13 years later and hate your job, that makes you pretty teachable. No, excuse me. That made me incredibly teachable. Like I was just like, I mean, it took me, like I said, I could run from it from a little bit, but it was obvious I was the problem. I mean, I'd always been a problem. That's where the answer always is, right? And that's the good news, the bad news. If the challenge is within me, I can address it, right? If it's outside of me, I'm sort of screwed. Like that's just I'd call that a constraint, right? Like, I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. But I can, if it's of my own making or if it's of my control, at least I got a shot. So right. That's what made me teachable. Was I eventually had to cop to. There was no one else to blame but me, and I got as far as I could on my own juice. It was time to upgrade the network. So, okay. The same reason why I joined Strategic Coach, quite frankly. We sort of didn't make it all the way to the front of EO, but enough that it was like, hey, like we could upgrade our network again. So, and that Strategic Coach crushed that as well. Yeah.
And it's so funny because what you shared there about, hating your business, but being the person who was the boss. I think that's something that happens to a lot of entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. I'm finishing my first book. It's called Owner Shift. And I have a chapter. The book's basically about hitting that. I call it dropping myself into the valley of uncertainty. So it's kind of like the gap concept in Strategic Coach. But I basically ended up, it sounds like you, where I didn't feel like anything was right in the business, but I didn't realize that everything that was in the business was exactly what I had asked for. You get what you asked for, and I had been asking for the wrong things, and I was getting them, and it was pissing me off. I couldn't figure out how to stop it. And the same things go through, I think all of us, almost all of us, not everyone, but a lot of us get to that same point, whether it's 5 years in or 7 or 10, or at some point you just wake up and you're like, what the hell have I done here? Because I'm supposed to be I'm supposed to be in love with this forever. It's supposed to maximize all the things I'm great at, and I'm supposed to have a great team, and everything's supposed to happen the way I want. And none of that is, I can't say that any of that is true right now. And
Mhm.
yeah, you look for, well, whose fault is it?
Mhm.
And instead of saying, yeah, I'm getting everything that I asked for,
Yep.
and I don't
Yep.
like it. So maybe I have to ask for something different in
Mhm.
order to get out of this valley and get where I should be.
Well, I mean, I would agree 100%. And what made it sort of uh, twice as bittersweet and certainly way more humbling is I'm a fairly spiritual person, and quite frankly, the reason why I believe I was had such great sales success is I was just trying to serve the people, and I had lost sight when I got into the quote unquote CEO chair. I got lost in the role, and and I lost sight of just trying to serve people, and how you would serve them is have a vision. Like, I mean, there was certainly going to have to be other tools added to the tool chest, but I had also sort of lost the servant. And it wasn't so much that I was trying to serve myself, but I got lost in like what I was supposed to do and all this other nonsense. When I mean, I was ridiculously successful at the restaurant. They asked me to do stuff I was completely unqualified to do, but they trusted me. And then I trusted that, I call it the boss, my higher power, whatever. If I do the footwork, the boss will provide, right? And so, like, it didn't always work perfectly, but I was a trusted resource to them. And so I got to do a whole bunch of things I wasn't qualified to do. And we got, most of them pretty much to where we wanted them. And when I was in sales, I didn't act like a sales guy was supposed to act. I was like, look, I intimately understand how to move this stuff because I used to drive the truck. I can actually coach them the exact right way to do this. And we may or may not be the right company for them, but like, I can actually serve them. And that was, not surprisingly, ridiculously successful. And I'd like to think for the first little bit of point to point and the other things that we're doing, that we sort of kept that spirit. But somewhere along the way, I started trying to think like a CEO. And that didn't make me like an awful self-centered person. It just made me a person that was sort of answering to the wrong authority, if that makes any sense. And yeah, so when it was like, oh, well, we want to lead this great company that has a mission that we can get excited about, then it all changed. But I can't stress enough, there would have needed to be more tools added to the tool chest as well. I mean, I think blind faith is great to some extent, but the boss frequently says, hey man, let's go tool up, right? So it was sort of a 2-for-1. I got lost in the role, and then also was under resourced in terms of what's really required to be a successful business leader. So
I've had a lot of time to think about that, and I want to run something past you based on what you just said, and you can sort of tell me whether I'm barking up the wrong tree or whatever. But you used the term, kind of at trying to be a CEO, and then you use the term, self-serving, and my mind went to something opposite of that. So I want to make sure, because like what my experience was is, as the business grew, I was, team got bigger. I was taking on all of these different responsibilities because I thought that's what I had to do. Like you were saying, to be the CEO, but I didn't see, so I saw that it took me a long time, but I think what happened to me is I became too unselfish, meaning I thought I was the hero, and I thought that everybody's needs came before my needs because I could fix stuff, right? I could put out fires. I could help people get to where I wanted them to get instead of training them how to get to where I wanted to get. And ultimately, when I found myself in this valley that I was talking about, it occurred to me, and some of it probably came from Strategic Coach, because I joined the year after, not quite a year after I fell into this valley too, Dan, sort of similar to you. But I came upon this notion that really I actually needed to become more selfish, not unselfish, and not selfish like in a jerky way, but if like with your vision. I mean, if I didn't know what was important to me, for the business, how could I expect anyone
Yeah.
to get on board with it or change the way that help me change the way I was feeling about myself? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously it's a slippery slope, and it's just so funny how the universe plays. So I was in a training yesterday, and I'll let him remain. I won't pull him down, but the facilitator was describing the same sort of dynamic, and they used the word self-full. Never heard it before, right? And I think that's the right way to think it. It's not selfish, and it's not selfless. It's sort of the proper level of self, right? Because if I don't exist, I'm 100. I mean, like I'm just a doormat, right? Whether I'm the hero or the villain or whatever, no, 100%, like 100%. And no, my story is similar to yours in terms of not only, I mean, I realized like at one point, like I had taken bright, capable people and turned them into really good question askers, because I was like the Google in the company. And like it's easier to come ask me the answer, the question, than it was to go figure it out. And there was a little bit of hero stuff in that and all that for sure. And then it was also just, it wasn't, it was more that I felt it wasn't guilt, but things were so good for me that I think I absorbed a little bit more than I think if I had looked at it, like if I was consulting another business, I'd be like, look, man, you need to move the line that way. I think I definitely drifted some of the lines. And then actually that same very first coach, she told me one time, she's like, you're entirely too accountable. She's like, there's times when you don't leave any accountability for anyone else in the team. And she's like, that's not going to serve you well. And that took me a lot longer to learn than I'd like to admit. Yeah. And it's not, I mean, there's a little bit of ego in that for sure. Like there's something that my ego doesn't express itself as in it. For folks that know me well, they know exactly how it is. When people first meet me, my personality comes across, they think it expresses itself. It expresses itself a little bit more subtly. And that's one of the way it likes to, is like, I'm just Mr. Super accountable guy. And it's silly. It's totally silly. And it's really destructive as a leader, super destructive as a leader. It's completely disempowering. And yeah, it's you end up hating your job.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Self-full. I have to admit, I don't think I've heard anyone say that.
No, I think he made it up. Now, he didn't make it up in that moment, but I think I don't think he's going to write a book around it or whatever, but I think, I know him outside of that training. I think, it's a good concept. It's sort of the right sized, in another context, I hear about being right sized, right? And I think self-full is right sized, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I have to say, when you said it, not only did I write it down, but I was like, self-full. So I've been saying selfish, and maybe I'm describing it wrong. Anyway, really good. So let's get in the weeds a little bit. Is that okay with you?
Sure. Yeah.
When I've heard lots of speakers say, don't be afraid to fire, your best customer if, their values don't align with yours and all that stuff. And from the stage, sounds good. I get it. Makes sense. All that. You said that once you worked with the coach and your team and you got your vision nailed down.
Yep.
Implementing the vision required 70% of your clients to be moved along.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, I can see in the meeting. Yes. Okay, this is
real. Yeah, it's 100% real. Yeah,
and
we went into. So here's the rest of the story.
Yeah.
In September of 2007, because of our back office being so strong, we knew two things. We knew it was going to be the best year ever in top line and retained percentage in company history. And we still fired 70% of them because we knew this is what we had to do. And I'm a big enough knucklehead that I actually want to enjoy my job.
Right.
Like, there's not enough cash. Like it was a very small part of my, I had a very, very small universe at the time. Very small, very small. but I've been in the place where I had more money than I could spend, and it was one of the darkest moments of my entire life. And so I know that money doesn't answer it for me. I'm not driven by money. Money is a byproduct that's supposed to get produced, but like I want to be able to brag about what we're doing, not about the results of what we're doing, but like the actual work like that we're doing, and how I feel about it. And so it was, I've never really discussed it within that length. I think my business partner at the time was a big enough fan of me, and the money was completely inconsequential to him. I mean, he cares about it, he's a responsible guy, but it was not going to change his lifestyle. That I think he was just willing to bank on me. But my guess is he thought I was crazy. And but the folks that know me think I'm Mr. High Risk guy or whatever, and it's not high risk at all. It's just if that's where we got to go and that's what's indicated, then that's the path we're going to walk. And so it was, yeah. No, I mean, I've heard it. So I've heard it. Have you ever made a decision that costs you money based on your values? I'm like, oh yeah. Like, I mean, we've done it, and we still do it. And COVID has just provided the next opportunity to do that again. Yeah.
And when you went about executing it, what can you give us an example of a client that no longer fit?
Yep.
Without the name, of course, but like you've done the others.
Yeah.
What kind of matrix did you go through, or what did they do that made them no longer fit, for example?
So I don't know that this will. I'll try to give a little bit of like the decision-making criterion, just to give it a plug, and then I'll walk you through the convo, the biggest one at least. So what we had decided was, and I can't stand the word, but it's just we don't have a better word, right? So what we wanted was like we could move people's stuff around, like we could, like we're specialized, but we could move it, like we could physically transport it. But for the folks that were willing to actually let us improve and enhance their systems, because I'm really a systems guy. At the end of the day, I'm a systems guy, and those relationships look wildly different than moving stuff around. And so our criterion is that as a result of working with us, your internal processes change and are improved. And there's probably a little piece of paper, a little disc around here somewhere that actually has that on it. And that was one of our measures, is like we both have to actually change based on us coming together. And we had done that with a group of our existing clients at the time, a very small group. And then there was a whole bunch of people that we hadn't, and they just sort of liked the idea that we were a very reliable shipping company. And so there was one very, very large customer, and I sat down with them the Tuesday after Labor Day, 2007. And I said, this is not a negotiation tactic. We are going to part company because this is where we're going. And I'm going to hold you to the back of your baseball card. You're a very large company with multiple branch offices, and we just don't get, there's no systems to this. You have systems, but you don't view us as part of your system. We're not a partner. We're not going to change each other. So with all due respect, we're going to move on. We had a bunch of business that we're doing together. And so I said, we'd like it to be over, by January 1st. We want to transition in a way. They owned almost every relationship with the customer. They were sort of a reseller for us or whatever. And so he said, look, I want it to transition well. There's no fantasy that we're going to go take the business away from you. We're going to go focus on all the people that don't know either one of us. And that's what we're going to do. And a couple of those key customers over time came back to us, not because we did anything other than they just wanted what we had. So, yeah. We've done, not the numbers are super dramatic and all that, but we've done stuff like that over the years, because that's just, why else have principles? I can lie and cheat all I want, but if you're gonna try to live it the right way, it's like, well, there's no point in doing the work and figuring all this stuff out if we're not gonna put it into play. And that goes back to, like, if I show up for class, I'm gonna ace the test. So if I'm delusional, if I'm in self-denial, whatever, I can fool myself as best I can. But if we're going to look to fix it, then we're going to look to fix it. So, yeah.
I mean, it's admirable. It's more than admirable. I wish I could come up with the right word for it, because I've been around business leaders and entrepreneurs and big company executives all my life, and they're always adapting to what the marketplace is throwing at them. And it often has nothing to do with what they actually believe. It's what they feel like they need to do in order to keep their job or remain in business or meet budget or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, and I'm far from perfect on this, but on the big decisions, the track record's super strong. On the smaller decisions, I can prove to be a knucklehead, but on the big decisions, we almost always get them right. When I say I answer to a higher authority, like I answer to the boss. They're just reporting into the wrong. They need to upgrade the reporting structure. Like it's crystal clear. Like it's crystal clear.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sort of want to share this. So we've incorporated, the best practices in our family of, it's just another organization, right? I'm a systems guy. And so we're not wacko about it, but I have almost a 6 and almost a 4-year-old, and they have little tiny bracelets that say who they are. And if you don't want to keep them, then give them back to us. But there's Team Rogers on there, and there's 3 rules to Team Rogers, right? And so my kindergartner, his PE teacher at school, Mr. Hay, says, "Hey, I want to be on Team Rogers. These look like great rules." And so rule number 1 is family first, and rule number 2 is always do your best, and rule number 3 is no quitting. And I don't want to get too out there, but it is a private religious school. And so I said, well, you can tell Mr. Hay that he's already on the team, because family first isn't the Rogers family, it's the boss's family. Like it's let's put people first. like I said, that's how we should roll. And I've sat in the business meetings, and you got some sense of what my personality is. Like there are people I think that are at least more likable, and I think certainly more gentle than I am, that you get them around a conference room table and they work for a Fortune 500 company or whatever, and they become ruthless, right? Like if they were your neighbor, they would bake you a cake or come give you chicken soup if you were sick. But they get at a conference room table and they're ruthless. And it's like, whoa, man, like it doesn't make any sense to me. And so good, bad, right or wrong, we try to show up the same way wherever we are. And that's just, I'm not stupid, but I'm not smart enough to have multiple personalities. People, it's okay if you think I have them, but I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be the same guy wherever we go, right? And so I don't want to have to answer to myself. Well, this happened before 2007, and I'd like to think that without this, it would have still happened, but it certainly was a great reference point. So about the first year we were in business, maybe 6-7 months we were in business. So I was working for the company, and then I bought it. And when I bought it, what that really meant was I got the 7 customer service people that were supporting my business, all the email addresses, cell phone numbers, and a friend on day 1 instead of a guy that wants to put me in the ground. And so about 6 months in, finally had a chance to sort of do the financials for real. And my ex-father-in-law, current father-in-law at the time, was not terribly active. He was a mentor, but he was not active. And the financials didn't look great, right? And so we looked at it, and I had made some really boneheaded mistakes in just doing basic accounting. But for about a week, I thought, this is just a bad idea. I beheaded the king. I consolidated greedy owner and prima donna salesperson into a single unit into this company, but somehow there's just not enough money left to make sense. So I guess it's just a bad idea. And it turns out that I was, like I said, I was just doing bad accounting. But prior to that, I walked around for a week that I had failed. And there was a couple things that had happened in the first 6 months that we're in business that I felt really good about ethically, in terms of I made the right decisions from an ethics standpoint. And I thought, man, if I got to put an L up on the board, I am so grateful that there isn't, other than being a knucklehead, there isn't anything that I regret doing. And then by the grace of the universe, we got our finances fixed, and it turns out I just didn't know how to do accounting. But that was a great reference point. And like I said, I'd like to think that we would have had that anyways, but I did walk around for about a week, 10 days, living with the idea that it had not worked, but that at least I could feel incredible solace and just actually really satisfaction that it wasn't anything that I had done from an ethics standpoint. And that's priceless. Like, that's better than money. Like, that's better than money. And so, so that's part of, I sort of forgot that was early in the business. That super strong reference point.
I like what you said about the get around a conference room and become ruthless. I mean, I feel like everybody's got people in their life on the business side where you're like, how could anybody like that person? This person is such a jerk, or they're whatever they are. And then you meet people who know them personally, and they're saying, wow, you know that person? Oh, what a great person they are. I mean, so generous. And so I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like you said, they have two different personas to them. When they show up at work, they're one person, and when they go home, they're another person.
Yeah.
And maybe we're all a little like that. I don't know, but there's those tests that sort of show that predictive index or some other, I don't know what, but it just always struck me as strange as why you would be so different. And I don't mean like maybe a little more formal or something, but just like complete jerk, and then complete best person ever at home. It always was strange to me.
No, I think that folks get lost in the situation, right? Like, it's sort of like situational navigation as opposed to navigation by principle. And it's why I sort of refine the restraints out. And as far as one of my restraints is it's chess, not checkers. And that's not even really fair, because like, if you think about what life is from a systems standpoint, right? It's multi-dimensional chess nested inside of multi-dimensional chess nested in, it's ridiculously complicated game, like unbelievably, like impossible to figure out. So try to approach it transactionally or situationally is just a bad strategy. It's super bad. If I have a guiding principle, I can at least test that. And if it doesn't work, then chances are I've probably misinterpreted the principle wrong, but I can course correct on that. And so it's a little bit of a variation off the copy off the Smartest Kid in Class or whatever, but like, that's a huge part of, I've got this brain, and it doesn't know how, it literally will sort of fixate on stuff if it doesn't sort of align. And so I didn't want to have to try to figure out how to make all these decisions. I think from where I sit, I'm not a humble guy by any far stretch, but understanding that I'm arrogant actually gets me closer to humble than people who are oblivious as to where they are on the spectrum. Wow. And I think that as humans, despite all this incredible technology and the fact that we can have this incredible conversation, and like, it's a super complex game, and we don't give it credit. And that's why I have the relationship with the boss that I have. I think it's the only, it's it's the best resource and the best strategy for the game that we're playing. And so because of that, like, that's what I answer to. The guiding principles are what the guiding principles are. And, it certainly works better for me. Everyone should make decisions for themselves, but that is the reason why. That's the reason why, and that's how it happened. Is that I got in line with all that stuff, and then that's really what took off. The rest was all sort of just the byproduct.
Okay, and Point to Point Transportation, your company is, as I understand it, you're sort of experts in moving event-related material.
Yep.
trade show stuff, and I don't know what the extent of it is, but it's event related. And you had mentioned brief, in passing the COVID, like when COVID comes along and all events worldwide are sort of canceled. What how did your vision, your restraints, and all the other things you've talked about, your sidekick, how did they get you through that? I mean, still going through it. Stuff's just starting.
We're doing it. It's still, we're right in the middle of it for sure. So little infomercial for PvP because it needs the help. But so in fairness, like what Point to Point is a world-class event solution for folks that value that see the value in managing back of house expenses. So by rolling our program, we can take what they believe is fixed sunken cost and reduce it by managing it better. And then I guess they could give it to finance, but all of our clients just use it for attendee experience. So like it's steak sandwiches instead of box lunches. That's what we do. And so that was fantastic. And it was, we're hoping that it comes back at some point, but that's really what it is. We had plenty of customers that we took their stuff. Those are our clients, right? And then we had customers that we took to trade shows or maybe we even took their stuff to a corporate event. So I saw this not because I'm a visionary, but because the boss is super generous. I got a call from a guy in Barcelona. And I think he was trying to pick the brain of a couple. I'm from Seattle, so you can figure out what cool companies in Seattle might be at a conference called Mobile World Congress. And he gave me a little bit of a heads up, but he also wanted to know what those two customers were thinking about going to Mobile World Congress. And this is in January of 2020. And he told me that the organizers, and he's certainly well placed, were seriously considered canceling it. Now, I have a 5 and almost 6 and almost a 4-year-old, and the oldest one at the time, his 1 day a week Chinese school had already closed because the rest of us didn't think it was a problem in December of 2019, but the Asian community in Seattle was like, there's too many people coming and going from China, and there's people dying in China. Like they stopped group meetings before anyone else. So it was on my radar. Then I get this call from Barcelona, and it's obvious. Like if Mobile World Congress, in my estimation, is the largest corporate event that happens on the earth. It's certainly, if that was on the chopping block because of COVID, that made it 100% real, at least in the perception of my customer, right? And if we go back to January of 2020, that's like more people die of lung cancer. And we had a totally different idea about like what COVID was. And I, again, in just my own little narrow band, I was like, this is going to absolutely hard stop, zero revenue, like over. And so I was incredibly fortunate that the boss gave me that. And I had a month to sort of plan and go through my own gyrations and everything else before I talked to the leadership team. And so then we could go through the gyrations and all that. And I say all that because this is a brag on the boss. My initial and only thought, it evolved slightly, but my initial and only thought is I want to be able to brag about how I conducted myself 25 years from now. Like I knew it was going to be a gong show. Like I just knew it was going to be a total dirty diaper dumpster fire. But it's like, I want to be able to brag about how I conducted myself. And there's some ego in there for sure, but that was like the right perspective to have. First of all, it's super long-term. And second of all, just keep all the decisions in the right way. And I didn't work for that. I didn't go journal for it. I didn't go meditate for it. It was given. It was in my head. And and that's a gift. It's an absolute gift of the universe. And it just hasn't really been knocked out since then. So, we're moving a handful of shipments now compared to what we did before. There's a little bit of activity, but we're still in the middle of it. But it's been an opportunity for me to transform myself and my career into what I think is whatever the next thing is supposed to be. So I mean, I want to be real. It was brutal, and it was way harder on the people that worked for Point to Point than it was on me individually. I've been pretty much spared. If you sort of take the Point to Point balance sheet destruction off the table, I mean, I've been completely spared by COVID. Zero impact. I mean, I've seen my kids more. We put synthetic ice in our garage and ice skate and play some hockey, rock wall in the garage. Like, it's been fantastic. I mean, so that's not me talking myself into it. That's the sidekick mentality that I've been given by just trying to operate on these principles and report report up to the proper place. Like that was the answer that I was given.
Okay. And speaking of sidekick mentality, let's move into something that's new and exciting.
Yeah.
As opposed to something that's older and exciting. This Sales Sidekick thing that you started this year or earlier this year. Yeah. What are you doing there?
Yeah, so just to sort of connect the two, right? We made all the tough decisions and dealt with it. And so I started talking to people in EO and strategic coach. And literally, I mean, this is how I just rolled out to them. I'm like, look, your problems are way cooler than mine. And my problems are super simple. It's like, make the decision, throw up in the garbage can and move on. Like, that's it. Like, and wait. And other people had way more challenging issues. Like, how did they stay open? And some people were like, oh my God, we're growing. And so that led to a lot of fun sort of thought experiments and mental exercises. And I'd like to think that we helped create some value along the way. And then inside of those conversations, sooner or later, it all got back to sales. Not all, but many of them got back to sales. And eventually with one of them, they sort of demanded that they're like, you have to come train my people. You talk about sales in a way that I've never heard. You use terms as if like they're like out of a book, but you're telling me they're not from a book. Like, come train my people. And so with this guy in particular, I said, well, let me clean up our training from Point to Point and see if it's what you think. I don't know. I mean, like, it's and so I showed it to him, and he's like, oh my God, that's amazing. It's what we want. And so I just wanted to be helpful at first. And so that's what we did. And then as we started to lean into it and try to create a vision or whatever, I mean, I think I look at business. I think the most useful way to look at a business is a system. And as a system, we could get super complicated, but to keep it just, useful, I think there's 3 subsystems. And inside of that, you've got the first subsystem of, we got to market it and sell it. And then the second subsystem, we got to produce it and deliver it. And then the last subsystem is we got to pay for it and get paid for it. And I think where I can be uniquely helpful, and the folks that we're trying to be helpful with, is if you have a viable business, right? So how do we define viable? That's an adjective. How do we define it, right? So I think how I would define it is I would say, let's look at those 3 subsystems and individually rate ourselves honestly, 1 through 10 on each one of those. And you're viable if you can make it to 24. I don't care how, or 24 or higher, you're viable. I don't care how you get there. 10, 4, 10, 10, 10, 4, 4, 10, 10, whatever. 8, 8, 8. There's one unicorn out there that's an 8, an 8, and an 8, right? But so if you get to 24, you're viable. If you want to grow, sooner or later, you're going to have to be 9 or better in that first one. You're always going to have to maintain 24 to be viable. But I guess we'll go on record for this. This might scare some of our clients, but on the point-to-point side, ironically, Point to Point as a transportation, as an event shipping company, blah, 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 I'd say our weakest leg was the middle one, hands down. Like 9 or 10 on the first one, and definitely 10 on the back, and probably somewhere around a 6 on deliver it, right? And you can, it's not that you fake it, but you can sort of be inefficient and ineffective in service delivery if you do the other ones well. And what I noticed with the people that started asking me for help in sales is they were viable, but they just hadn't figured out how to sell. And they were actually, most of them are like ridiculously great at number two. Like in a way that I look at them like, oh my God, like one of our clients, I tell them all the time, I'm like, if we moved over just a little bit, we would completely switch positions in this conversation because you're so much better at this part of it than we are, right? So that's what we're doing on the Sales Sidekick side.
Okay.
Is we've got a system that we think that we can reproduce what we did at point to point from a sales perspective. Yeah.
And when you run into that type of situation where the production or execution is a 10 and the marketing and sales is a 6, let's say, do you think that's because of the expertise of the owners or whoever the leadership team is, or do you think it's something else that?
So I didn't really realize I had formed these opinions over my time of knowing business owners, but there's no question that I did looking back in the rearview mirror. So this is a straight opinion. At some point, I'd like for Sales Sidekick to be successful enough that we have some data that actually backs this up. But right now it's just a total opinion on my part. But like, I'm absolutely convinced, knowing business owners, that what it is that they're in love with themselves. They're not self-full at all. They think they have a special snowflake. And what I'm here to tell them is there's no special snowflakes. None. There's just degrees of magnitude. That's it. They're all the same. They're all the same. Every business is the same if it's viable, right? Once we get to viable, they're all the same. The minutia matters, but it doesn't matter, and certainly doesn't matter to the customer. Like it's irrelevant. The customer couldn't care, right? But we fall in love with our own stuff, and that's what makes us great. And then most of these folks that I know, they're sort of reluctant, accidental salespeople because they're such great craftsmen that anybody with half a brain in their head that wants what they're doing is like, oh my God, this woman or this man is a genius. Of course I want him to do all my stuff. But at some point that doesn't scale because they can't be on every project, or they're on top of their business or whatever. And so we can sort of decode what that secret sauce is and then build an entire system that is non-personality driven, sustainable and scalable, and it doesn't even have salespeople in it. But we got to say sales because no one hire us if we just said we're the sidekicks, right? But yeah, no. So that's what we're doing, and we're in process with. I mean, it worked ridiculously well at point to point, and so I'm biased that I think it can work. But on the B2B side, I'm absolutely convinced at this point that it transmits to other businesses if leadership is willing to make the decisions that are required to redesign your business. So I don't know if that transmits, but the one thing I'll just drop is if we think about it as a system, which I think is the most useful way to look at it, what I would say respectfully is that the current accepted lines of the system where we draw the lines in terms of what a business is supposed to do, it's just too small. If we held it to a higher standard and asked it to produce a greater product, you actually solve a bunch of these problems. Sales and marketing doesn't become a problem if you make it a bigger organization. If it delivers if it creates more value than just a standalone business, right? So what we're trying to do is create systems that have more valuable byproducts than actually what we're selling. And that's a super, super grandiose, delusional, arrogant thing. But I'm confident that we can do it. I mean, there's by arranging the work and by by creating value in a community and not worrying about whether you get paid for it, you can create more value than you get paid for and still afford to pay people. And that's essentially what we're doing. Yeah.
Well, I don't consider
this is only like the third time through with somebody that we haven't had 5 conversations with. So I appreciate you trying to roll with this, Mike, and whoever's listening in a week or two. Yeah.
I don't consider what you said to be delusional or arrogant. In fact, the whole system thing makes a ton of sense. and I'll use myself as an example. Maybe I don't feel this way now, but I did feel this way at one time. You know, when it comes to operations or execution, there's a way to do it and there's a way not to do it. I'm going to choose the way to do it. When it comes to back office, there's a way to do it and there's a way not to do it. I'm going to choose to do it the way I should do it. And then when it comes to sales, or God forbid, marketing,
Yeah.
we throw up our hands, Dan, and we go,
Yep.
it's like an art and a science and all this. And, you know, I'm unhappy with it. I don't like the way it's going, but I'm just going to roll with it because, so it's almost as if we dismiss that as being systematizable. When
I'll give you a real life example. And all I'll just say is that this scales. This will be on the ground, one quote unquote, one transaction. But I'm telling you that it's a fractal. It will expand to larger. It'll scale. But I did this countless times, right? Countless times. A large Fortune 10 company asked me to fix a problem, and they were working with an agency who was managing essentially a sort of point of sale kiosk. And it was a little bit of a gong show. And they're like, hey, you guys are bulletproof, go fix it. And so I showed up, and I like to tell the story with all the colorful details, but we'll just cut to the chase. But showed up at the agency. They're all beautiful people because it's a North Hollywood, and they're you know, and they own this Fortune 10 customer for all these other things they do. But they got to let the little freight guy come in because they can't hit the broadside of a barn. And when they gave me the tour before we sat down, they pointed out all these different things and all the expensive artwork and all that other stuff. But they had this procurement department that basically bought and coordinated all these different services, one of which was shipping. And he said, hey, I'll make sure we introduce you because you could become one of our providers. And so I was like, okay, fine. So we sit down and we talk about what the problem is. And I want to sort of protect the elephants in the room, but so they were working with a very large, recognizable shipping company, and it wasn't going well. But as an informed systems guy, that is actually the right provider, but you have to engage that provider the right way to get the right result. And they were engaging them incorrectly and getting incorrect results. And so that was obvious when we spelled out what it was. I mean, we asked a bunch of questions and all that, but that was the issue. And so I said, look, I can send you the process that we train our operations department on how we manage that elephant. It's beyond self-explanatory, but if you have any issues with it, and these people have any issues with it, they can reach out and I'll coach them up or whatever, but like, that'll fix it. And the guy's looking at me like, well, what's in it for you? And I'm like, they asked me to fix it. Right now, I know that the Fortune 10 company actually wanted me to go ship it. But like, I went to fix it because we got to fix it. And what I had decided, I mean, what was obvious is I didn't want to compete with those three people in the room. Mm-hmm. They had made a business decision that was going to be a service that they offered to their company. The people that we worked with value that, but don't want that on their payroll, whether they're the end user or they're the reseller in between us and the end user, right? So there's no point in trying to create value in a place where we're not going to be valued because they think they can do it themselves, right? And the reason why I bring that up is back to the creating value. I don't know how many dollars were created there, right? Like, can we put a dollar amount on it? Like, I think I sort of shocked this guy that had sold all this business, and here this crazy bald dude comes in and gives away this national contract. But what I would say is, I think the value that was created there is that hopefully their business is run slightly better, and he feels slightly better about another human being on planet Earth. That's way better than us getting a few more shipments, right? And I know from previous experience that sooner or later, even if we had converted them into a customer, that agency, sooner or later, they wouldn't have valued what we did.
Right.
Because they had made a core decision that that's what they wanted to do as a business. I'm not going to change their mind. I'm not going to argue with them. It's like, hey, So it's not surprising that if you approach quote unquote sales in that regard, you have people reaching out to you all the time to fix things. So you can then pick the stuff that you're actually supposed to do, help on the other ones, and not even have to be a salesperson. Right? And this actually happens on online business and all that all the time. Like they don't have salespeople and it works. It's just somehow we think that we have to go dial for dollars or whatever. And it's like, no, just actually go create enough value in your community so people want to work with you. It's unbelievably hard to do, but it's not terribly complicated, you know? And so I don't know. I'd like to think that P2P overall, that, you know, we sort of impacted our community in that way in terms of helping people in the way that we could help them. And there's no question that we got more than our fair share of stuff that sort of quote unquote fell in our lap. But we didn't have any salespeople. 7 years in a row in Inc. 5000 without a salesperson. Now, when somebody needed a sales presentation or whatever, I would show up or someone would go do one, but we weren't RFPing or, you know, dialing for dollars. We had built a system inside the community that we serve that it was very attractive for people to come ask us for help. but we would coach them to their answer, not to ours. And in my ops, in our ops department, so back when I used to do the initial training back in the day, and sooner or later, another person on the team took that on. But I would tell people when they went into operations, here is your get out of jail card. I was servicing the order because we're in a relationship business. Like, I don't care if we make an investment on this shipment, but we retain the relationship and we retain our credibility in the marketplace, and we retain the part that they can trust us and that they respect us, we're golden. And so we ran the business. That's why we were 6 in operations, right? Because people had blank checks, right? But it's amazing when people think, oh my gosh, these people are going to throw the kitchen sink at my order. Like, it's not surprising they want to work with you. But it's also, we're only working with the people that's what they're looking for. There's a bunch of people that can move stuff around that don't need that. And I think that it was way easier for me as a 5'7" bald freight guy. I never got it past the curb to fall in love what we were doing. You know what I mean? Like, no one's like, oh my God, it's the brilliant shipping guy. Like, oh yeah, so I couldn't fall in love with my craft like other business owners can. So I was ridiculously fortunate in that way. But I think if you do what I did, you'll get what I got. And that's what we're trying to share with other people but the folks that we'll work with on the Sales Sidekick is they're going to have to sort of expand how they serve their community in the long run. Like, there's no games to it. Like, you're going to have to go serve the community. It's not going to cost you billions of dollars, but you're going to have to get past, this isn't revenue generating activity, or I'm not getting paid for this. It's like, what if we just made a lot of friends and had a lot of people trust us? And that sounds crazy. If you're a viable business though, you can choose to make that investment. You can't choose to make that investment if you're not viable, because you got to cover payroll. But if you're viable, you can transition your business. And we're hoping that we can find people that want to take that journey with us. We've got a way to systematize it to make that transition happen. But that's ultimately at the end of the day what we're hoping to do. And I'll just shoot for the fence on this one, or swing for the fence on it. What really gets me excited about going to work is we're trying to redeem work. Like, I want everyone to love their job. And I think we've just broken work. We broke it because the system that it resides in is a little too small, and we all think about it the wrong way. So one company at a time, we're going to go try to redeem work. And gosh knows that we've fallen short of that in all the businesses that I get to touch, but we're trying. That's what we're swinging for. And I think the way to do it is through the sales and marketing engine, right? So that's what we're doing on Sales Sidekick.
Okay.
It's working.
Hey, I appreciate you sharing that philosophy, because I was sort of like on the edge of my seat with every word. I really was. It's just it was a very refreshing way to talk about something that is a problem for so many business owners, a solvable problem, as you as you sort of very eloquently explained. And it's been so much fun talking about burrito rolling and working in a cemetery and restraints, sidekicks, and coaches that kick your butt, and vision, and firing customers, and bracelets with your kids. I mean, Dan, we covered so much today. It's just been so much fun to get to know you and to have you share your wisdom and your story with us.
Yeah, no, I was looking forward to the conversation, and yeah, no, I most days, most time of the day, I realize I'm the luckiest guy in the room. Like I am. There can be people as lucky as me, but I just know where I came from, what's been provided. Yeah, like I just and the reason why I'm sort of willing to lean into all these crazy ideas is I just think it's the secret sauce. Like I'll take credit for the part that I did. It's less than zero, but the 100% that's been provided is way less than what I put in. And God bless Christine and everybody else. What's been provided is way less than what we have put in. And I think it's because we're trying to get lined up with these other things. And it's all stuff. I mean, part of maybe what it is I'm an older guy with young kids, but it's like, if this wouldn't be a good idea for me to coach my 5-year-old on, why would we make it a business practice? You know what I mean? It's like, if they're teaching something different in kindergarten, why are we not incorporating it in sales and marketing? And that sounds sort of silly, but like, when you really look at what's happening, yeah. So I don't think we've figured much out, other than we've just figured out what doesn't work, and leaning in on the stuff that appears to work. So.
Well, I think that's the humble part of you coming out, because it sure feels to me and sounds to me like you got a lot figured out, for sure. And you're willing to share it with other people, which is like the bonus on top, like the thing the boss would want you to do.
Well, and what there was, whether we were quote unquote firing the customers, or in a quote unquote sales presentation, it's like, look, this information is useless to me if I'm not going to work with you, but I do think it's the right way for you to do it. So if we're not the right people, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. And hopefully, the knucklehead that gave you the chocolate chip recipe is the one that you want to bake the cookies. But at the end of the day, let's make the cookies. You know what I mean? And yeah, I think it's, Dan Sullivan and other people talk about abundancy versus scarcity. I mean, I came from a place of scarcity, and I got sort of by the grace of the universe sort of shook into abundance. And as a sales guy, it worked really well. And when I've lost sight, that's usually what it is. Like I think there's limited resources, and the boss is super generous, and he will always make one more. You know what I mean? That's restraint number 8 is you can always add one. So, right? It's not always productive, but you can. And so from that mindset, I usually end up in a way better spot. And I think between either looking inward for whatever reasons, fear, scarcity, selfishness, whatever, they don't lead to good outcomes, right? And so it's not that I'm Mr. Virtue. I mean, if anything, it's just effective. It's like, hey, this is pretty obvious. This just works better. And so it's all stuff that I think we try to teach our kids, and then we grow up and we forget it ourselves. So yeah. Anyway, good times.
Well, we'll leave it on that. I do really appreciate you coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure for me. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much. It's been a great time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did Happen podcast.